Në ditën e 9 të misionit në hapësirë të 4 astronautëve të NASA-s Artemis II, që të roqën vëmendjen e njerëzve dhe shënuan histori për fluturimin më të largët nga toka, Kallxo.com ka intervistuar David Whitehouse, astrofizikan, ish korespondent dhe ish redaktor për shkencë në BBC, si dhe autor i disa librave për hapësirën. Whitehouse, para se t'i bashkoj BBC se të shkruan të libra, ka punuar edhe si shkencëtari hapësirës për NASA-n në projekte hapësinore në vitet e 80-ta dhe fillim vitet e 90-ta. Në atë kohë, ai tha se ka punuar në misione hapësinore në Kolumbi, pasi kishte doktoruar në observatorin e radioastronomisë Jodrell Bank. Ndërsa ekuipazhi i NASA-s, që me vete ka astronautën Christina Koch dhe 3 astronautët Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover dhe Jeremy Hansen, pritet që të kthehen në tokë më 11 prill 2026 këtu me kohën e Kosovës në mesnatë, ndërsa u nisën më 1 prill 2026 dhe i gjithë misioni u transmetua drejt për drejt nga NASA.
Well, the only other spacecraft we sent to the moon are the Apollo spacecraft, and the Orion capsule is somewhat larger. It's about a third larger. But remember, when you go into space with the capsule, you have weightlessness, so that the floor is the ceiling is the floor. So there seems to be, to the crew at least, although there are 4 as opposed to 3 on Apollo, there does seem to be more room for them to move around. And if you look at the transmissions, as you said, from space, they seem to have plenty of space indeed to perform their operations. When the seats are folded away, there's really rather a lot of space inside the Orion capsule. And I'm told that when they go to sleep, they have plenty of space to hang their hammocks wherever they like. So I think that one of the successes of this mission, as well as the dramatic, amazing pictures of the moon, which really are absolutely the best ever taken from space. I think one of the great successes is the fact that this capsule is now ready for future missions, barring, of course, the re-entry, which is its most severe test, which is going to come in just a few hours.
I hear people keep asking, why didn't they land on the moon? Why did it take so long, let's say 56 years, to go back to the moon? How would you respond to these questions?
Well, there have been several attempts to try and restart the moon program. But the problem was that the original trip to the moon, the Apollo programs, were seen as to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. And once America had done that, the way wasn't prepared for what they had to do next. And the politicians saw that they were spending all this money on the moon and they had lots of problems domestically, that they wanted to spend the money back on other problems. So the way wasn't really prepared for what do they do next after they have beaten the Soviets and put people on the moon. And since then, there have been several plans and ideas to restart the program, but they've never really gotten anywhere because they were too ambitious, they were too expensive. And once they got started, the budget was cut back, the timetable was extended, until Trump came along. And Trump actually, for reasons of his own, said to NASA, when are you going back to the moon? And they said, well, we hope we might actually put people on the moon in 2028, 2030. And he said, well, that's not going to be within my presidency. Get a move on. And fair play to Trump, whatever we think about President Trump, he did force NASA to accelerate their plans to go to the moon. And so far, although there are major hurdles to be overcome over the next few years, they're heading in the right direction, so to speak.
What are the main risks or dangers astronauts face throughout the mission? Hopefully there haven't been any serious incidents so far, but what are the key hazards of a flight like this?
Well, of course, the main problem with spaceflight is the launch and the landing. Once you get into space, once you get underway, things should be relatively straightforward. And even though they're much further away than anybody's ever been, the capsule was working well, and they were on a trajectory which will bring them back home automatically without any intervention from them. So really it's the launch and the re-entry which are the dramatic parts. And this was the first time that people have been launched on the Space Launch System, which is the most powerful rocket people have ever ridden on, much more powerful than Saturn V, which sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon. And it had only been launched in that configuration once before, and there were some problems with it. So it was a relief to see them go into space so effortlessly, so to speak, without any incident. The re-entry is going to be more of a problem because the first Artemis mission, which was an uncrewed capsule, did have problems with the heat shield, which is essential to keep the crew alive during re-entry. And the heat shield on Artemis II is identical to the one they had problem with. And what they're doing is they're re-entering in a slightly different trajectory to try and alleviate those problems. Now, they're perfectly confident it's going to be fine. But nobody coming back from the moon at such a speed like that is totally at ease until it's finished.
During the first days of the Artemis II, there were reports of issues with the bathroom system aboard Orion. What exactly happened, and how was the problem resolved by the crew and mission control?
Well, do you know, I don't think they've completely resolved the toilet problem. I think it's still a problem as they return home. Every mission, practically every mission that's gone into space on the International Space Station, and specifically on the Space Shuttle, has had a few problems with the toilet. It does seem to be one problem that occurs very frequently. Of course, this is the first toilet that's ever flown to the moon. The Apollo astronauts used a different system. What seems to have happened is that the outlet, and they eject the liquid from the toilet into space. Because, of course, space is extremely cold, that the outlet has frozen, and it's frozen in there and blocked the system. Now, they did try earlier on to move the spacecraft so that particular outlet was in sunlight, so that perhaps it could be melted, and that worked to a certain degree. But there are problems, again, with that outlet, particularly the Apollo missions to the moon. They did not take a toilet. First of all, before the mission, ate what was called a low residue diet, which meant that they didn't need to go to the toilet quite as often as they would have done back on the Earth. And basically they used plastic bags. Plastic bags were used, and then they were sealed, and then they were the liquid was either ejected into space, or the solid waste was mixed with antibacterial powder to make sure that it weren't going to be a problem. And actually, they were returned to Earth to be studied by biologists, because there are experts in human physiology when they go to the moon, and they wanted to know how weightlessness and everything else affected the human digestive systems. There are a whole host of effects that happen to the body in zero gravity, because we're not designed to live in zero gravity. So on the space station, it affects your immune system, your endocrine system, your nervous system, your bloods. It affects the density of your bones. It affects the distribution of water in your body. And it may well be that for those who live on the space station for long periods of times, they will never fully recover from the problems, or perhaps from the problems of exposure to radiation for the rest of their lives. It's an occupational hazard. However, going to the moon for 10 days or so shouldn't be a problem, because they'll be able to recover from such a short period in space, except if there's a solar radiation storm. One thing the crew were told, and it's quite an interesting point, is that the human eye is a very good optical instrument. The human eye can see changes in color and texture that sometimes it's very difficult to see on a photograph. So although we've got wonderful photographs of the moon, actually having somebody there and looking around, scouting at a target area they've been told to look at, and say the texture of that rock, the color of that so-called ejector blanket, which has been thrown up by an ancient explosion, looks slightly different from what it appears in the pictures, and we'll take a few more observations of that.
Yet, there are people here in Kosovo as well and elsewhere who find it hard to believe these pictures are real, taken by Christina, Reed, Victor, and Jeremy in space. Many ask, where are the stars in these pictures? Why don't they appear? Are there stars between the moon and Earth or after Earth? If it's okay to ask, how would you respond to these who are skeptical about these pictures?
Well, there are stars in the sky. It's just that the moon and the Earth are so bright that in order to get a good picture of them, you overexpose and the stars are not bright enough to register on the picture. There have been some observations they took when they looked away from the moon, when they were in the moon's shadow, where they have seen stars and they have seen planets. It's just a question of the exposure of the photographic frame. So there's no doubt at all that these pictures are fantastic and they are real. You know, there are in the internet age, the people who believe that we never went to the moon and it was all filmed on a set somewhere in America and all this is fake and artifice, they can have a louder voice than they did in the past and they can come up with their theory. But none of their theory works in the sense that all the observations of the lunar surface, of the astronauts, of the pictures, they're all perfectly understandable as being real. These pictures are the heritage of everybody. You know, they're going to be on people's bedroom walls. They're going to be on their screensavers. They're going to be used in articles and in books for forever from now on. And you know, they're important. They're important. And if anybody says we didn't do it, then I agree with you that we should say, yes, we did. And isn't it wonderful?
So what's the next step of NASA's Artemis program? And do you believe the agency is technically and operationally ready for it?
I think there are major hurdles to be overcome before people land on the moon. And that's although this system worked with Artemis II, was the space launch system and the Orion capsule, and that's worked very well. In order to get to the surface of the moon, they're going to have to rely on Elon Musk's Starship, which is a remarkable vehicle, and it takes off and goes around the Earth with great drama, and it's visually very exciting. But that has to stop being so much of a drama and start to work practically over the next few years. The Starship has never entered orbit. It's got to enter orbit and it's got to work well. It has to be refueled in Earth orbit, and then it has to go to the moon, and it's designed to land on the moon. None of these things have been done, and yet NASA wants to put people on the moon in 2 years' time. And I don't know any engineer or space enthusiast who thinks that that is going to be a realistic prospect. They're going to have to take longer than that to get this system to work. And indeed, it may be that after a few tests, they realize that that particular system will not work and they'll have to do it another way.
To be realistic, how close are we to sending humans in a mission to Mars?
To Mars? Mars is so very different from the moon. I mean, first of all, the planet itself is wonderful, and it is so different from the dry, cratered moon. Mars is the first true world of the cosmos. It has an atmosphere, it has weather, it has morning mist, it has clouds, it has dried up riverbeds, it has polar caps, and it has the tantalizing possibility that there may have been life on Mars. So Mars is an active, wonderful world. The moon is dead. The moon is a world with a landscape of the past. The problem with Mars, of course, is that it is so far away. You can get to the moon in 3 days. Going to Mars will take you perhaps 10 months. And we don't know how to build a spacecraft to keep people alive for the outward trip and the return journey to Mars. And we also don't understand the psychological impact of the isolation, because the first crew to go to Mars will be isolated in a way that no humans have ever been before. Because even when they're leaving the Earth-Moon system, they will not be able to come back for several years. So we need several more decades of research yet to have a feasible chance of sending people to the moon, to Mars, sorry. So I put it in the 2030s, which actually is interesting because it means that the first person to walk on Mars is with us. They are young, studying science and technology, perhaps, and who knows what country they live in, but they walk among us. The first person on Mars and their crew are already alive and will be looking at the Artemis II pictures with wonder and amazement, perhaps wondering if they one day could also be astronauts. So the Martians are with us, but it's going to take until they grow up, actually, and become the same age as the Artemis II crew before we can have, I think, any chance of sending them to Mars and back and having a successful landing on the red planet.
What message would you give to young people who are considering studying science or astronomy, physics, and what would you say to those who are actually studying these sciences?
I think that science and technology are just wonderful expressions of what we can do. They build the world. Science is the reason you and I are talking together at the moment. Science is the reason we have good food. Science is the reason we have good medicine. Science is the reason we have transport, communications. Science is the reason we have the clothes we wear. We have all the gadgets. Science is the reason we're even able to experience art in many respects over the radio and in our sound systems. So science is the bedrock of our existence. And yet science not only gives us what we need every day, it gives us what we aspire to. And aspiring to something in the future, like going to the moon, like going to Mars, is as important as aspiring to understand the human genome, the way a system works. It's as important as to understand the way the Earth's climate works and how we may improve on it and steward our planet better. So if you are inspired by the Artemis II missions, you might want to be an astronaut. You might want to go into space. You may achieve that. You may not. You may be part of the millions of people who support these projects, who develop the technology, the spacecraft, the techniques.